week, I was sitting with a group of guys together, and we were having a really good conversation. We were sitting around a meal. There was men, gentlemen, women, all sorts around the table. And one of the people on the table turned around and said this to me. The moment I dreaded, the moment question I didn't want to hear. They said to me this question. They said, Jim, do you think no, actually didn't say Jim. They said Pastor. They made it even worse. Pastor, do you think I'm fat and need to lose weight? What do you say when you're at someone's house and you're sitting with other people and they turn around and say, Pastor, am I fat and need to lose weight? And I was just like, I thought, I've got 3 options here. Number 1, I can tell them the truth. Number 2, I can tell a lie. Number 3, I can fake a heart attack. And at that moment, faking a heart attack was at number 1 in my head, okay? I thought, I've got to try this. You know, when those moments when someone asks you a question, you weren't quite expecting the answer. You weren't quite expecting that question even, and you don't know quite how to answer it, and it sort of catches you off. I'll tell you in a minute what I said. I won't give you the away quite yet. But I often find those awkward questions and those awkward moments quite often happen when we're on a journey. You know, when you're stuck in a car with somebody and you can't escape them, and they ask you something, and you know you've got to give them an answer, but you don't want to give them an answer, and it catches you off. That awkward moment when you may be talking about the weather and football, and then they ask you something, and it goes really quiet, and you're not quite sure what you're supposed to say. It could be questions like make you wriggle, like when your girlfriend asks you, what do you really think of my mother? You're like, well, look, that's the trick question. Or your boss says to you, do you think I'm a good boss? And you're like, where do I look? Or your parent asks you, do you think I was a good parent? What do you think I did wrong as a parent? And you're trying to be really nice, aren't you? You don't want to tell them all the stuff they've done wrong. You're like, oh my goodness. You know there's really awkward moments? Well, I think Jesus and Peter had one of these moments. And we can find the story in Mark chapter 8. And they're walking, Jesus and his disciples, they're walking between a place called Bethsaida to a place called Caesarea Philippi. It was about a 25-mile walk. In those days, they didn't have buses or trains or cars. They were walking there. It was a long way. And in the midst of this 25-mile journey, Jesus just asked a couple of questions to his disciples and to Peter. And they must have talked about a lot on that journey. But I think this was the thing that really jumped out to Peter, the thing that Peter noticed, the thing that Peter couldn't escape. And this is what Jesus said to the disciples. He said, who do people say I am? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others say one of the prophets. And this was not an unusual question. Like Jesus was probably just wondering, what are people saying about me? What are people saying? And the answers they gave were okay, like Elijah. Some people thought Elijah was going to come back, or one of the prophets can't come back. Sort of okay, sort of believe it. The answer which really surprises me is John the Baptist was with Jesus at his baptism. So how the heck do people think Jesus and John the Baptist were the same? Okay, has anyone thought that before? It's a bit strange, but hey, some people do. But it's one thing that I really noticed when preparing for this message is all of these people who, all these names that they're saying Jesus is, or Jesus is like, they're all people who stood up to the government. You know, John the Baptist, he stood up to Herod Antipas, and he complained to him, and he said, for goodness sake, you've gone and married your brother's wife. That's not good. That isn't good, okay, in case you're thinking of doing that, right? That's not good. And he was prepared to stand up to the king. In those days, that was a deadly thing to say, but that's what John the Baptist did. Then you've got Elijah. Elijah challenged Queen Jezebel and King Ahab, and he stopped them before he tore down the Baal worship, and he challenged them. And then we have the other prophets in the Old Testament, and a lot of them stood up to kings and says, what you're doing's wrong, what you're doing's immoral. So I think when the people in Israel at the time of Jesus were once saying that Jesus was like these guys, do you know what I think? I think that those people wanted Jesus to be like John the Baptist. They wanted Jesus to be like Elijah. They wanted Jesus to be like all the other prophets. And it's really interesting because the place where this conversation took place, it was a place that was given by Caesar Augustus to Herod's family. And the place called Caesarea Philippi was built by a guy called Herod Philip, okay? And it was built in honor of the Caesar. And what he did, he was a Jewish king, but he built a Roman temple right in the middle of this area in honor to Caesar. It's kind of everything that Jews hated, isn't it? So when Jesus asked this question to the disciples, and they gave these answers, I think the disciples, they wanted, and all the other guys in those days, they wanted Jesus to come and to kick some Roman butt, if there's no other words for it. They wanted him to knock him out. And they were saying, come on, Jesus, this guy Jesus, he's the one who's going to change everything. We get the sense here that these people were missing who Jesus was. They were missing who Jesus was. And I wonder for ourselves, how many times do we try and make Jesus into something that he's not, something that suits us? You know, I love sometimes you hear people talk about Jesus and you think Jesus is their boyfriend. Have you heard some of the songs that are out there? And you're thinking it's like a pop song. Okay, you're going along, you're there going, and they sort of want Jesus lovey-dovey, you'll do anything, all this sort of stuff. Other people make Jesus out to be Santa Claus. You know, the blab it and grab it. Okay, crew, I want this, I want that. And so what? It can be really easy for us. If you're like a really strong dictatorial person who likes everything done in a certain way, you can make Jesus out to be this angry person who always wants you to do things a certain way. If you don't, he's going to get you. And we can change Jesus and mold him into the way that we view him. We want him to be. But I think Jesus sensed this. Because his next question to Peter is this. He says, okay, that's what everybody else thinks. But what about you? Who do you say I am, Peter? And Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. Now, Peter had been around Jesus for a while. He had seen Jesus do miracles. He'd seen Jesus do healings. He'd seen Jesus cast out demons. He'd seen Jesus feed thousands of people with a few loaves and a couple of fishes. Surely Peter knew who Jesus was. Surely Jesus knew that Peter knew who he was. But I think Jesus got personal with Peter because he didn't want Peter to hide behind what other people think. You know, Jesus was calling Peter to take ownership of his thoughts and response to who Jesus was. Do you know what? It can be really, really easy to come to church, and if I ask you who Jesus is, it can be really easy to give me a good answer. I can give you good answers to who Jesus is. And I can tell you what other people think about Jesus. I can tell you what Muslims think about Jesus, what Hindus think about Jesus, what some Christians think about Jesus, what liberal Christians think about Jesus, what fundamental Christians think about Jesus. But Jesus' question doesn't matter what other people think about Jesus. He says, who do you say I am, Peter? Who do you say I am? Now, Peter had a good response. He said, you're the Messiah, God, which means the anointed one by God, the one who's going to come and establish the rule here. But Peter, I think, was being challenged by Jesus here to make his mind up about who Jesus was. Really get to know who Jesus was. Do you know what? There's a problem that if we take our impression of Jesus from everybody else, we're going to get the wrong impression of Jesus, aren't we? If we try and take our impression of Jesus from everybody else and from other people, we're going to get it wrong. The best place to get our impression of Jesus is by reading the Gospels. It's really simple, isn't it? Go back to the source, go back to the author. Because I heard an illustration earlier, I was reading about it, and I heard about a guy, and what he did was he wanted to measure some wood. So he got the tape measure. He measured the first piece of wood. And then what he said is, I'm not going to use a tape measure each time. I'm just going to use the original piece of wood and measure it against. That's quite sensible, isn't it? The problem was each time he measured against the piece of wood, the wood got longer and longer and longer. until after about the 10th piece, he looked at it, and his new piece was that much longer than the original piece he was measuring against. And the problem is, if we take our ideas of who Jesus is from other people, what's going to happen is we're going to get a Jesus who isn't actually Jesus. Does that make sense, guys? We need to go back and look at what the Bible says about Jesus. Because the thing I've loved about these conversations with Jesus is I've felt that I've gone back and I've learned more and more about Jesus. More and more about the way he did things. And I wonder if Jesus was to ask you the question of who do you say I am? What would you say? I'm not going to quiz you, don't worry, don't panic. But what C.S. Lewis, who was a theologian, an author, an all-round legend, I love C.S. Lewis, he said these words. He said, I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, referring to Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. You've heard that before, haven't you? People say he was a good man, but I don't believe he was God, okay? Or he's a prophet, I don't believe he was God, okay? But C.S. Lewis says this, that is the one thing we must not say. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. Guys, we need to get who Jesus is right in our heads. And on the message, on the follow-up message, which is a link below if you're watching on the video, or if you're in church now, on your little barcode, there's a little bit of video. We can't say Jesus was just a good man and wasn't God, because that's not who Jesus is. And it's a challenge. Who do you say Jesus is? Now, I want to encourage you. On Tuesday, Leslie shared a message in Bible study. It was a brilliant message. It's available to download. There we go. Someone's just heard my message pop up on there. Heard my voice. But Leslie shared a brilliant message about how she used to go to church and how she used to know about Jesus, but she didn't actually know Jesus. Guys, you know what? It's easy to come to church. It's easy to regurgitate what everyone else says about Jesus. But you need to ask yourself this question. Who is Jesus? Who is Jesus really? And I encourage you to listen to Leslie's testimony. It's on the link below. Because you know what? Jesus wants you to truly know him. He wants you to truly experience him. And I believe he's asking you this question, just as we finish. Jesus is asking you now, who do you say he is? And then I want to ask you another question. Is that the Jesus in the Bible? Or is that the Jesus that you want? Is that the Jesus in the Bible? Or is that the Jesus that you want? Let's stand.